Welcome back, everybody. We're thrilled to see those of you coming back who are doing so, and we're also delighted to be welcoming those of you who are just joining. We want you to know that if there are things that you'd like to see, everything will be available to view, so you can catch up on what you might have missed should you wish to do so. So the conversation that preceded this really was a perfect framework because it was about valuing craft, culture, and labor. And now we turn our attention to a wonderful panel that will focus on mining, responsible sourcing, and best practice. Now, before I introduce people, I want to say one technical thing, which is if you have questions, you are able to type those questions in to your right and then send them to us. If you have a question right away, please send us the question right away. Keep them coming, but please do not hold on to your questions. Send them early and send them often, as the expression goes. And now I'm going to turn to our exceptional panel. So I'm doing this, you might say, in alpha order. First, Aimee Boulanger, the Executive Director of the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, often referred to as IRMA. Nick Cotts, who is Vice President, actually, I think I've got this wrong, Vice President Corporate Affairs at Newmont, which is a critically important mining company. Cristina Villegas, Director of Mine to Market at PACT, and about to be a recipient of our 4th annual award for leadership in responsible practice. Following her, Feriel Zerouki, Senior Vice President, Corporate Affairs, De Beers Group, and I am honored to say the recipient of the 2nd award for leadership in responsible practice, and we are thrilled to have you with us, Feriel. And Jonathan Gonzalez, Market Development Specialist, the Alliance for Responsible Mining. Also, I'll give you an acronym for that, ARM, very important. And Jennifer, we call her Jennifer, but Jennifer Lynn Archuleta, who is the editor-in-chief of Gems and Jewelry, the Gemological Association of Great Britain's publication, and quite beloved within the jewelry community for her acuity and writing and insights. So with that, I turn the panel over to you.
Well, thank you. I also want to recognize Robert Weldon, who I don't think...
oh my goodness, I didn't do that. You know what? No, forgive me. I'm just going to actually jump in because I feel absolutely horrendous about that. I'm
not to worry.
No, I mean, good golly. It's not, a flagellation is in order, not worry. So Robert Weldon, who is the director of the Richard T. Liddicoat Gemological Library at GIA, I have to say 2 other things. He's an extraordinary photographer, played a key role in developing GIA's Gem Guide program for artisanal miners, and for that, he too will be a recipient of this year's award for leadership in responsible practice, much to our honor and delight. And he too is an exceptional, extraordinary person whom I've had the honor of getting to know well over the past 2 years, and I cherish that. So, please excuse me for my oversight, and Jennifer, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I can't tell you how excited I am to be working with this panel of wonderful people, some of whom I've known for years and some of whom I'm just meeting today. It's a real exciting moment for me. So thank you very much for having me. With that, I'm actually going to start with Robert who I've known for a long time. And I'm hoping that our questions will engage not only the panel to maybe ask each other questions, but will encourage our viewers to ask questions as well. So Robert, you started out as a reporter, and once you moved to GIA, you started not only with your photography, but working with the field gemology team. And so over the past 30 plus years, you've seen a number of mines. And so I'm curious as to how, not only how the conditions of the mines have changed and how the conditions the miners work in and how they approach their jobs have changed, but also how your perspective has changed around the way that mines are set up and the conditions that miners work in.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. Yep, I was definitely a reporter. I was a reporter with JCK before this. I became a gemologist and then became a reporter for JCK. And that took me to different parts of Africa. It took me to parts of South America, Asia. So I have seen a lot of mines over about a 30-year career, more or less. And it's interesting. I'd say in the last few years, some things have changed, and more on the large scale mining, in the large scale mining area, because I think people have realized that they need to embrace some type of sustainability. But unfortunately, what I have witnessed is that many things have stayed more or less the same for artisanal miners. Now that's changing too slowly. But as you know, with gemstones, they mine the vast majority of gemstones, about 80% of what comes out onto the market. Slowly that is changing, and we're hoping to be a part of that change with our partners with PACT, and we're seeing that very many other people are doing the same. You heard Roger Derry earlier talking about what he's doing out there, so that is changing. But I just want to tell you an interesting little story. About 12 years ago, I visited a mine in Bolivia, and I expected that mine for ametrine to be sort of I don't know how to explain it, but not a very well-run mine. And I was incredibly surprised that it was a very well-run mine. It was safe. There were standards. The miners had time off. They had a medical nurse on premises. There were all sorts of protocols with regards to the environment and how to protect that. I remember I was sitting in a dining room in the mess hall, and a coral snake came slithering into the mess hall. And I was right on the table when that happened, and someone yelled, "Kill it!" And then another person said, "No, you can't kill it because of the environmental things." So they actually trapped that snake and took
Wow.
it, miles out and let it go. So that was 12 years ago. I'd say it was a medium-sized mine, maybe 50 people mining at it. I played soccer with the team afterwards in the afternoons. I was there for about 3 days. But now fast forward to 1 year ago when I was in Myanmar, and I saw an artisanal mine there that it was just so difficult to explain how incredibly dangerous it was. There was a hole in the ground, as you can imagine. A lot of these are alluvial mines, so you're tunneling deep into riverbeds or ancient riverbeds. There were very thin tree trunks holding up massive boulders, and people were tunneling in under that, bare feet, absolutely no hard hats. So I think what I'm finding is that education for all of these miners, whether it is from the large scale to the artisanal miners, really needs to be stepped up, and that's basically where GIA comes in. But I've spoken enough. We'll let it roll on to someone else.
Thank you, Robert. That was really insightful. I appreciate it. Yeah. Feriel, I hope you don't mind if I ask you a question next. So I know you've been working on responsible sourcing in the diamond industry for most of your career. And so can you tell us a bit about where the industry was with responsible diamond sourcing once you started in the field, and how you've seen the industry evolve over the course of your career?
Thanks, Jennifer. So happy to be here and lovely to meet you, and really proud to be part of this panel with such important speakers and experts on these issues. So, hello, my name is Feriel, and I don't know if most people know, but I've been in this industry for 17 years, sorry. I started off really looking at, sustainability issues before the term sustainability existed. And we were talking about responsible sourcing. In the diamond industry, it was really about, the crisis of blood diamonds, the conflict in Angola and Sierra Leone, where it was determined that the trade in rough diamonds was actually being used to fund those conflicts. And a huge humanitarian crisis came out of that. That type of burning platform, unfortunately, is what creates action. And so when I joined, I saw that people really working, government, civil society, industry members alike, competitors, all working together to help resolve this issue of conflict diamonds. And there was the creation of the Kimberley process. And, it gets a lot of slack and it gets a lot of attacks, but I think it's due to a misunderstanding. I believe personally, it's a huge successful process for the diamond industry. We've got 82 countries, 82 governments that, once a decision is made, have to enshrine that decision into law in their country. And, in a small team, we don't all agree on very important issues. So consensus is such an important thing, and that's worked through dialogue. Now that was, it was actually started in 2000, implemented in 2003, 3 years for 40 odd governments to agree on policies around controlling the trade of the international trade of rough diamonds. We at the Bears back then, immediately understood, okay, this is an issue, and it's not focused solely on the international trade of rough diamonds. It's a supply chain issue. Our product is a consumer-facing product. And so let's quickly understand what risks exist across our supply chain, from mining through to retail, and develop a set of standards that would address these risks so that we can ensure that the diamonds that we produce make their way to the consumer in a way that meets or exceeds their expectations. And we launched what is now known as the best practice principles back in 2005, but we never promoted it. We never communicated it. We never did anything. In fact, it was only when questions came from mainstream media or consumer concern or NGO concern that we showed them all of the work. And now I think the landscape is changing, right? We did a lot of work to secure our supply chain, and that's not good enough anymore. So even back then we said, okay, so what do we do based on our learning? What do we do to provide these facilities to the wider industry, who the majority of them, not just in mining, but also in the midstream and in the downstream, are small players. And they don't have sustainability teams. They don't have that money to spend on these issues. And that's why we became founding members of the Responsible Jewelry Council, where we've heavily subsidized it to create that training and the information and the guidance to be able to understand what you need to do wherever you are in the supply chain. And now, we're moving forward. Now we're talking about sustainability. We're moving away from do no harm to actually do good. So what can we do as an industry from a sustainability point of view, from a sustainable development goals point of view, where we can help this global platform achieve something where we have the right to win? We can't address all the challenges in this world, right? And we're not NGOs. We need to find commercial solutions to global challenges to make it sustainable, ultimately, to address these issues and make the world a better place for our children and the future generations that are here, and that are very interested in this industry. This has been my journey, and it's been my, it's been really exciting for me, Jennifer. I really love this. I love the ability to be able to engage on issues where we can really make a change.
Oh, we appreciate your passion. Thank you so much. Thank you for your very detailed response. I appreciate it. I'm going to move over to Aimee now. Aimee, it's nice to meet you. We haven't met before. Right now the world's attention is on the both global public health, understandably so, and climate change. And can you talk to us a bit about what that has to do with the jewelry sector and the raw materials we source for jewelry?
Great. Thanks so much, Jennifer, and thanks to you for moderating, and to Lisa and Aaron for hosting this panel. So many tuning in. So I'll pick up that answer to that question, building off of what Feriel just said as well. I completely agree that frequently the attention that comes to the issues of mining and resource extraction come in very narrow focus on single issues that are viewed as splashy out in the media. And some of those splashy issues are incredibly important issues, whether that be these issues that were of blood diamonds or child labor, et cetera. But alone, I think that any stakeholder sector is frustrated by the single issue focus, right? To look at child labor and industrial scale mining and say that's the big issue is to miss what many, mining affected communities experience day to day as well. So it's a disservice, these sort of narrowing in too far. I mean, when you have important issues, forced labor, child labor, human rights abuses, things like that, of course they're important to bring, but single issue focus is frequently, everyone loses in that picture. I agree. So I really agree with that point that Feriel's bringing up, and that this broader attention coming in this sector is needed. And to the question you've asked more specifically there, Jennifer, this moment of looking at both climate change as a social and environmental issue and public health, and the overlap between them, and the fact that this last year and a half has forced us to do a whole set of things that we would have thought were impossible in terms of changing behavior, in terms of changing practice and changing structures. We've had to for public health, and for many and most of the world, they continue to have to do so. It's a moment to reckon with a set of structures and systems themselves, which aren't very sustainable. And so I think there was a moment last year as the world began to really shut down that I wondered, will environmental and social responsibility be seen as luxuries, as things we only do when there's extra money or extra attention and everything else is humming along fine, or will this be viewed as core? And I think that that was in question for a couple of months, but then I think it has resurged with a clear sense that this is core, that any businesses or communities or individuals coming through this time will have to have resiliency defined in very different ways, but core to that resiliency will be environmental and social responsibility, in a sense of our own dependence on the environment, that social and environment aren't even separated, right? That communities or social issues are directly respondent to clean drinking water, sufficient drinking water in increasing drought times. So I think that added attention right now is coming direct into this sector. I think that also the attention that's coming with the need for an energy transition that goes with climate change is bringing in a whole sector where you don't have to educate so much, that the top of the supply chain, that our raw material sourcing is a direct portion of that. I mean, for many of you on this call, 15 years ago, you were needing to explain to the jewelry sector at the end brand point, why does your raw material sourcing matter? Why are you being held to account? You don't own mines, you don't operate mines. Why are you having to answer for this? Now that education isn't needed. I think more and more end brands and even the end consumer understand that they are part in that raw material sourcing, and that they're going to be connected back to it, that they are complicit, but then also have opportunity to create positive change in that space. And so I think that we are right thick in the midst of that right now, with a world able and interested to value that investment in environmental and social responsibility in a way that hasn't come at this level before.
Kind of interesting to think about how millennials, who are our next generation of jewelry buyers, who are also living through COVID, who also really care about these social issues, how that will come together as almost like a perfect storm to make these issues important in the coming years and decades. So thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Jonathan, hello. It's nice to meet you. So I wanted to switch to talking about the importance of creating the demand for gold from responsible artisanal small-scale mining, and how that has been received by both mining communities and by the public.
Of course, and thank you so much, and happy to meet you all. Hello from beautiful Medellin, Colombia, where the Alliance for Responsible Mining is located, really close to artisanal small-scale mining operations here in Colombia. And yeah, as you might know, it all started by an initiative called Oro Verde, or Green Gold. So yes, the focus has been mainly gold. And to talk about demand and building on what I just said before, as a millennial myself, then it's like, yes, we're all paying attention to the trends and to social responsibility and the origin of materials, and but also the brands and the industries, they have responsibility into different claims. But then to go back to the mining operations, so as you may know, the Alliance for Responsible Mining main purpose has been to support communities and families that happen to dedicate their lives to artisanal and small-scale mining. And that comes with a lot of risks, we know, and realistically speaking, it's not easy just to tell them to do something else because of cultural reasons, political reasons, economic, you name it. And it comes with risks such as endangering the environment, child labor, selling these materials to markets that are not that legal, or illegal groups. But I mean, the approach is actually to support them into mitigating those risks, or taking them away from that scenario, and actually evolving into this activity into a force for good. So that quote by Feriel, like that, it's not only not doing harm, but actually doing good, sustainability, I may steal it. And so
I think we might all steal it, yes.
And yeah, so these mining communities, of course, they start baby steps, right? So a first step could be aligning to the OECD guidelines for supply chains, and that for us is the craft code translated into an ASM context. And then when they start becoming formal and legal, then adopting practices such as reducing mercury, reducing chemicals, caring about human rights, getting involved the women in the communities. Now we're talking about higher standards, such as the fair mine standard, which is for us like the highest point. And then all of these mining organizations, this is not an easy path, and they have to invest a lot of resources, money, time on this. And then they get into this high standard. And of course, they're like, I still need to sell this gold, right? I need to sell this. Is there actually going to be demand for gold with this added value? Because I've been buying helmets, I've been buying security equipment, I've been paying for my audits to get a standard. So what happens next? And that's why we also work really hard to support them into connecting with our legal market that should be interested in this origin and all of this story. So they're like, is there demand? And it may be a paradox, because sometimes when I talk to people in the industry, they're like, is there supply? Is there actually going to be volume? And it's like, yeah, as long as we keep the demand, right? Because that's the incentive. That's what encourages them into keep doing the good work. And that's the incentive they see, and if it's actually worth it to get these certifications. Of course, it is by becoming formal and sustainable, and not endangering the environment, but of course there is an economic element here. And what is at stake is that they see, okay, is there value for me to keep with the certification, or the ones coming in the pipeline to get all of these certifications to actually be certified, is they're actually going to buy this gold with this value. And when you're not able to sell that, then you either sell it cheaper or you reduce your costs. That means, you know, diminishing everything that the certification stands for. So going back to your question, why is it important? The demand for artisanal and small-scale mining, responsible certified artisanal and small-scale mining, is because first, they depend on it to make a living, and also because that would encourage those to become more responsible, and also that encourages that there is more volume and more supply, pretty much.
Excellent, thank you so much. Nick, it's nice to meet you. I was really intrigued by your experiences working with Indigenous communities. And so my first question for you is, what has been the biggest lesson learned on Newmont's side about ASM and Indigenous communities at the mine that you're currently working at?
Well, thanks, Jennifer, and a pleasure to meet you, and great to be on the panel with all the esteemed speakers. And congratulations to Feriel and Cristina for your award. That's great. Well deserved and hard earned. What I would like to do, Jennifer, if I can, is to just give a little bit of background on what our history has been and experience with artisanal small-scale mining. And then I can kind of, maybe the next question, I can talk about some of our lessons, because I think without that context, it's hard to understand what do those lessons actually mean.
Absolutely.
And where do they come from? And just for those who aren't necessarily familiar with Newmont, we're primarily a gold mining company operating in Australia, Africa, and the Americas, and have 12 producing mines currently. And we also have some lead, zinc, and silver production as well. We have, as a company, artisanal small-scale mining occurring on or near our active operations in Ghana, Suriname, and to some extent, although much less, in Peru. What we've learned, and Cristina and Jonathan are very familiar with, that every ASM context is incredibly unique and different. And so to draw comparisons between countries would be unfortunate to try to do that. I think applying what you've learned in a different context is important. Newmont as a company really buckled down and said, what's our role? What's the interaction between large scale mining and small scale mining and artisanal small scale mining? And we decided to formalize our view on that and created a global strategic framework that we've then rolled out across all those jurisdictions where we have artisanal small scale mining. And so we've been working on the implementation within those specific countries relevant to their context and reality on the ground. And I think the goal of the strategic framework is certainly to enable us as a company to explore, develop projects, and operate in proximity to small-scale mining or artisanal small-scale mining in a way that allows us to protect the environment, meet all of our permit conditions and obligations, our community commitments, et cetera, but also recognizes the important livelihood component that small-scale mining does provide to community members. And what role do we play as an advocate for small-scale mining, and how do we influence and align and communicate around some of the things that we've tried? We have a role globally to do that. If we look at Suriname, artisanal small-scale mining is referred to as pork knocking in Suriname, and it's been going on with the indigenous communities and tribal communities for hundreds of years. So it's not a new thing that communities are suddenly involved in. There's a long history of engagement, and along with that history, not that it's anybody's fault or there's blame, but there is environmental destruction, there's deforestation, there's sedimentation, there's stream hydraulic issues that no longer function there's mercury in the environment, all those things that we're aware of that can come along with artisanal small scale mining. And so those perhaps present opportunities to us as opposed to just simply risks. In the specific Suriname Marion mine context, our mine is located on the traditional customary territories of the Kawina and the Pamaka Maroon tribes. These tribes are descendants of African slaves who escaped from plantations and into the interior of the country. And currently, under Surinamese law, they are not recognized as indigenous groups or tribal groups as having any land rights whatsoever by the government of Suriname. So that paints an interesting context of how we as a formal company with a Surinamese government who's our partner, how do we engage these Maroon tribes that are not actually recognized by the government as having rights? And in the 2010 time period, the government moved in and actually evicted all of the small scale miners from the area that they gave us rights to. Along with that, we recognize clearly that that's not an acceptable solution to Newmont, to have livelihoods simply disrupted and removed from communities that had had that livelihood for hundreds of years. And from that eviction came a commitment from the company, which was really around how do we recognize those rights? How do we support the right to mine in a way that those miners have certainty and security of tenure? What role do we play in helping identify and facilitate alternative livelihoods should that be desired? As we heard from Jonathan, that may not always be the desired outcome in many cases. It might be. And then what is our role in providing assistance to these miners to help them with some of the environmental challenges they have, with just better business models, improved recoveries, et cetera. And from that came our work plan that we're now implementing with our NGO partner Solidaridad in the case of Suriname. And some of the things that we've achieved so far in this is helping the Pamaka specifically build and form a co-op. It's a very small community. The entire community of the Pamaka is about 1,200 individuals. And the mining community is even smaller. So the desire, the interest, and the ability to form a co-op existed. And so we've worked with them to help them form a co-op that works for them and has all the rules and governance components that are meaningful to them. We've actually identified a location within our mining rights area that has prospectivity for gold development and have an application in with the government of Suriname right now to be able to connect the tenure of that section of ground to the co-op and the artisanal small scale miners, the Pamaka miners specifically. And we want the community to own that tenure. We don't want the Brazilians, we don't want whoever else is coming into mine to own that. We want Pamaka to own that. So we're waiting for that application to be finalized and issued. And then on the alternative livelihood front, we've started two things. Those miners that want to be doing something else, we're training them on equipment operation and looking to integrate them into our mining activities. And so we've got a number of the community who are doing that. We also are looking at training those for different alternative livelihoods that have nothing to do with mining. And so that work is ongoing. And then we've started a program on restoration of ASM impacted environmental areas. So these stream beds that have been alluvial mined for years and years and years that have contamination, that have sedimentation issues, we're actually training the ASM companies to reclaim those areas that are disturbed, to restore the environment in those areas and help them understand why that's important, and then teach them how to do that. And then finally, looking to the long term to say, how can we partner with different international organizations to bring better technology into the area so that those miners can continue to mine at higher efficiency and productivity rates while decreasing their environmental impacts, just what Jonathan was talking about. And so that's the journey we're on. It's taken a long time to get to this point. If we think about when we first came to know each other in 2004, and here we are in 2021, and we have a partnership and we're starting to make things happen. So that just gives you a little glimpse into our journey with our ASM community partners around the Marion Line.
Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to hear about your activities and what you're doing to help these disenfranchised people. So Cristina, with that said, I wanted to ask you, in your with your expertise, what are the top 3 most exciting things that are happening in the ASM sector right now as they relate to jewelry sourcing reform?
Yeah, thank you. And it's really an honor to be on this panel. I know everyone here, and I respect both them and the organization so much, and companies so much. So thank you. Yeah, it's really an exciting time in the jewelry sector. I feel like the last 10 years have been really important for the reform movement. And I think it's even more an exciting time for the ASM sector now, artisanal and small scale mining. And I say that for a few different reasons. First, as kind of Nick just talked about, there is some really cool interaction and support work being done between ASM and LSM operations. And for a while, that was like a kind of a taboo subject. For a long time, and really until the last 5 years, even engaging with ASM, that was a very reputationally very tricky thing to do. But I think over the last 10 years, the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, has been facilitating these discussions and making ASM a little less scary, and really elevating the livelihood, the importance of rural livelihoods and ASM therein. So for example, ASM is the #2 most common rural livelihood in Africa after farming. After farming is the #1 thing, which is, mind-blowing for most people. 1/3 of all ASM are women. Most people have never heard that. And that's so interesting. There's so much good storytelling that's available when you start engaging and you start measuring that impact. So I guess that's the #1 thing, building off what Nick just spoke about, and Feriel's excellent work in Sierra Leone, where they're really supporting and doing excellent work on a project called Jump Fair. And I hope she talks about that later, because it's one of my favorite projects in the sector right now. So that's #1. #2, I think there's some really interesting products that are coming to market that are built around ASM, that are built around these rural producers who have come together and want to improve their mining. So you have the work that Jonathan's group has been doing for many years, really, trailblazed for all of us. Starting in the jungles of Colombia, and really inspiring the other materials involved as jewelry. We learned so much by watching ARM and learning from them. I think the most reform efforts are focused on gold, because it has, let's be honest, the biggest challenges. But we have so many cool, talented people working to making the gold mining sector beautiful and diverse and inspiring. You also have Moyo Gems, which is my pet project, my dream come true, as I say. And we're showing what's possible when the right people come together, and we're making that a project done on a commercial basis, not a charitable one. It has positive development impacts. It's on a commercial basis. It's a commercial project. So I think there's lots of really interesting, exciting examples done in different corners of the world that are bringing ASM products to market and really making sure the miners are at the center of that effort. They're co-designing, they're leaning in, they're being rewarded for good behavior and progressive improvement. And I think lastly, one of the most exciting shifts, I think, is the power shift that is happening in colored stones, colored gemstones. We're starting to see ASM leadership organizations moving from maybe like the back seat to the front seat. So with Moyo Gems, for example, we co-designed that program hand in hand with the Women Association of Tanzania, Women's Mining Association. In Zambia, you have the Zambian ASM leaders directly exporting gems now and taking control of that story. So you have this really interesting shift from miners being completely invisible before to now being the center, and people want to see them and hear from them. And I think it brings value to our materials, it adds value, and also adds to the storytelling of this beautiful jewelry sector that we're all a part. So thank you.
Wow. That was really great, Cristina. I just absolutely loved what you say. I hope you don't mind if I jump in here because yeah, you said it so well. And I was just writing in my notes, you know, I think the storytelling aspect of all of this is kind of what has been missing, but we need to tell the story, and the story is there, and it's very interesting. You know, if you look at it from a retailer's point of view, it's a great story to tell consumers who definitely want to hear it, especially in some of the younger generations. And if we don't tell it, you know, there will be a problem down the road. So, you know, I think I'm so proud to be working with you and with PACT through GIA. And I'm just going to jump in and say that, you know, our view, since we don't buy or sell gemstones, has always been, you know, what can we do as an institution? And of course, we've done that through education. You may know that we worked on this booklet. Eventually, we contracted with PACT as our partner, and we took this book, this educational artisanal miner book, out to far-flung communities in Tanzania. It worked very, very well, and we learned a lot through the process as well. But I think education, from our point of view, education is absolutely key and fundamental in making things things better. And you know, we added a component just recently. Cristina, I think maybe you could speak to that as well, which is, you know, the health and safety component. We were looking at it from more of a gemological point of view, but artisanal miners actually need a lot of information on how to do things right, you know, just how to take care of themselves, because if they hurt themselves, they're not going to be able to mine day after tomorrow. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Yeah, I think it's just an example of when you have different groups that haven't kind of been in the same room before, you can create some really interesting and innovative projects. So as Robert mentioned, we have an ongoing collaboration in Tanzania, but then Africa-wide, which is exciting. Once kind of COVID, you know, is kind of calms down a bit, we can unpause it. But yes, we started realizing that, yes, we can teach about gemology, you know, hand in hand with GIA, and make it accessible to these rural miners. PACT helps reach them, and then GIA teaches it. But we can also start talking about health and safety, and with the idea that if you don't engage, nothing will change. So what we do is just begin building situational awareness, begin kind of helping them prioritize what are the different health and safety challenges. And I think this is also where like some big companies can help play a role too. You know, health and safety is a big part of the mining, the larger scale mining culture. Not yet for ASM. And there's some really cool ways that we can all come together to really lean in together to help make the whole sector safe and more beautiful.
One thing I'd love to chime in on that as well, Jennifer, if you don't mind, as we hijack your whole agenda. Just picking up on some of these great comments that have been made, and Cristina spoke well to the progress that's been made in the reform movement over this last decade, which I completely agree. Feriel spoke to the same. This work's still to come, because my focus is all mined materials, not just the jewelry sector, but is that this whole new demand that's coming for mined materials that are associated with renewable energy are, increasing this demand around extraction, right? It's an irony point, a friction point, that even as you try to shift, it's creating more consumption in one space. There's a lot of debate about how much more consumption is needed. If we do all the consumption we do right now and we just shift it over to wind and solar, then we're sort of shifting impacts from one place to another. So there's a lot of really good talk around materials retrieval and recycling and reducing consumption, increasing efficiency, increasing durability of the things we use, so we're not such a disposable culture, at least those in affluent industrialized societies. But still, there's some amount of this new pressure coming, and that's creating a whole sense of resistance for many communities that have been the bank account of the world's raw materials, especially Indigenous communities. And you're seeing it more, particularly flare up in places like Chile around the Atacama, right, in Argentina, in the US, in Nevada, in Greenland around rare earth materials. So a whole set of these other materials. But so what's the flow over, though, to the jewelry sector? I mean, I think that part of it is there's just a lot more attention on raw material extraction and the impact and the conflict, and what are Indigenous communities saying, who are saying, look, it's not just, green energy you all need as you drive your fancy cars and other things, and we have no power in our desert communities on the edge of this lithium extraction, right, or the coal extraction that used to be here before. We still have no power as we sit here with our diesel generators. Is that there's that rub that continues on, right? And to Feriel's point from earlier, it's not just in what is described before as conflict affected areas, is we've got conflict in a whole bunch of areas, right? Whether that's US or Canada or Russia or Greenland, as well as, places in Africa, in Southern South America. But I think that for that moment right now, it offers this opportunity for radical transparency. I think that there's so much work that industry trade associations can do that is really positive work. We work closely with the Mining Association of Canada frequently, and Responsible Jewelry Council and others to really mentor, as Feriel spoke, mentoring your competition as well as yourselves, and increasing the capacity and knowledge and know-how to do more responsible production. But I think in terms of credibility, we're just going to need to recognize that Jonathan spoke to the many standards out there. And while it's clear that artisanal scale mining and large scale mining changes need different strategies, that's why IRMA and IRMA have an MOU working together, because we need to complement one another, but we need completely different strategies to work with Nick and Feriel, for example, then to work with the artisanal scale miner and work with PACT and their outreach there. But in terms of a standard, the equity and governance is so key for credibility. That's why that's fundamental to what IRMA is doing. And it's why we'll continue to work with the trade associations who can mentor members, who can close the door and have an industry-only conversation. But the logo that comes at the end and some claim of credibility is going to need to come from these more independent places. Ideally, that comes from government laws and regulation. What I do is never going to be as good as or replace the role of law and government. We need those rules that everyone needs to follow and to standardize them more and more. But as Feriel said when she spoke to the Kimberley process and its many challenges as well as accomplishments, 80 governments. My goodness, right? Like that is part of the reason we use involuntary standards, is because we're trying to help push, because going one by one to each of these governments to create change is a tremendous amount of work. It needs to be done. Again, it'll always be the most important work, but voluntary initiatives can help to create a model for that and a template and push that up. But I just think we must realize at this moment, in terms of the work still to come, Cristina's next phase that's out here, that equity and governance and allowing that moment, right? The moment of radical transparency that's come to the garment sector, to forestry, to seafood, to cocoa, coffee. This is our moment in mining. And I think that it's a time to talk about, like, it's not all 5-star and AAA, right? The world already knows that, right? They've got phones and YouTube and things to show that. And unlike oil and gas, this is stuff that we're saying we're going to continue to use and probably use more of. So what are we going to say about the real impacts of mine waste and tailings, about water, about human rights, about Indigenous people's continued friction as they feel very threatened in the way the world is going today, and how are we going to create the value that Jonathan spoke to, the market value that reassures that if companies invest in a fundamentally different operating model that holds at the highest environmental and social responsibility, that the market will reward that investment.
Yeah, and if I can just say, wow. Thank you, Aimee. Wow, so much to say there. I totally agree with you on industry leadership. I think there could be a lot more leadership within the diamond sector. You have De Beers being pioneering and incredible in what they're doing in Sierra Leone and elsewhere. But I kind of wonder, why isn't the rest of the industry keeping up with them? And I'd like to see some leadership there, if I can be so bold. And with gold, the same. You have it's a diverse sector, and it's dominated by larger scale mining. And you have some really incredible projects like NICS, like there's one that Solidaridad is actually working on in South America with Indigenous women. Helping build their standards and selling to some really elite companies. Why can't we see more of that and get more guidance from those associations, both gold and diamonds? And colored gems, same. So if I can be controversial as the NGO person, one of the people on the panel, I guess that's my role. But also, just also recognize that sometimes NGOs can also get it wrong. And I think sometimes we kind of, not we, but the nonprofits can kind of get carried away with naming and shaming. And I think we have to spend equal amount of time praising because when you praise, you encourage companies to keep going. And you can say, I love this. I wish they'd work on this, but what they're doing is great. I think we have to kind of be more balanced in our approach in the mining sector because there's some real bright spots, and we should be praising those companies that are doing the right thing.
I think Cristina, sorry, Jennifer, I just want to add
No,
into
don't
that.
sorry.
I fully agree with what you're saying, and it does take leadership, and it does take leading companies to push the boundaries and push the edge to pull others with you. And as you said, NGOs don't always get it right. We don't get it right either all the time, right? And we all have made mistakes, and we've learned from those mistakes, and we hope not to make them again as we go forward. But I think leadership around that says, so what do we do about that, and how do we help others gain benefit from the mistakes that we've made, the solutions we've identified, and share those things, because that's what starts to lift the performance of the industry, whether it's gold or diamonds or some other commodity. And I think from the ASM space, as we've all said on this panel, that it's changed dramatically in the last 10 years. Well, I've been with Newmont for 27 years now, and I think back to when we started and we couldn't even have a conversation about ASM within our company. And today we're doing things that are, taking big risks from a company perspective around ASM. And so that's how far we've come. Within the gold sector, we're starting to have this sharing of information through the World Gold Council in our around ASM. What are we doing? How do we get more companies to embrace it, to understand it, to figure out how to coexist with artisanal small scale mining? And what are some of those examples that we can really shine a light on? Not that they're perfect or that they got it all right, but that there's important lessons for us to learn from that we can share with each other. And I think, to Aimee's point, the more we're able to do that, whether it's the IRMA standard, whether it's Mining Association Canada, whether it's World Gold Council, whether it's ICMM, how do we, because there's always going to exist multiple standards, right? I think I've resolved myself to understand that, but how do we improve all of this, right? Because different companies are going to attach to themselves to different standards. And I think the key is, let's lift the standards and the performance through all of those entities, because that's going to have the largest reach and impact to address what Aimee was talking about, this proliferation of mining that's going to have to happen to meet the low carbon economy of the future. And I think that's a challenge for all of us.
I think Jonathan would like to say a few words about some of the impacts that he's aware of, if we could give him some time.
No, thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, it's just that, speaking on behalf of an NGO as well, and like to be a bit controversial also, the impact and the change we can see in these mining organizations or mining communities, they're big. So it's just like going back a bit to the storytelling part of it, and that's how we can share the impact as of now in a qualitative sort of way. And this week, I was having a conversation with our communications team. They were in Honduras in a project we're supporting there, and they were like, they really have a lot of work to do, but what they're saying there is that they really depend on this because the alternatives, they're not that great. And we're reflecting that on the other mining organizations that were a little bit more formalized, like the one certified with the Fairmine standard here in Colombia. And there's, for example, one in Huila, Colombia here. And because they're already selling their gold to these jewelry brands, and they were able to pave and build the roads in their municipality, in their town. Because it's so remote that the government, they never go there, but very centralized republic. So they became an engine for this development of the community. There's another one in Cauca that they are the only ones, because they're certified, that hire a truck so they can put all their waste into somewhere safe. And that's something that they can do because of these resources. Or in Peru, that they were able to get involved the women in their communities to support them with workshops, so they tailor the uniforms that the miners use. And that's thanks to this premium, and that's thanks to you know, them selling or doing what they do good. And all of these stories, that's something that get passed through the value and then the jewelry industry. And we'd love to support them into this super studies of carbon neutrality, and that's trendy right now in the jewelry industry. Like, look, we want to be carbon neutral. Look how amazing we want to be. Does that mean that you are going to disengage from mining communities at the origin? And that's the controversy right there. So there are a lot of stories, and there's a lot of hard work to share the impact in terms of, you know, stories and qualitative way, but also into the quantitative aspects of reducing chemicals or carbon emissions, etc. We can only do much, and they can only do much, right? But that's the work we have to do.
Thank you. Aimee, I think you had a couple of words, and then I want to circle back to something we were talking about a little bit earlier, but if you'd like to share your thoughts, Aimee?
Yeah, in brief, I'll just continue Jonathan's line in being provocative, and follow Nick's point too on the idea of, we do hear a lot of, there's so many standards and this proliferation of standards, but many of them are expectations of industry trade associations of their members, which, as I've said, is a good thing. It's good that World Gold Council and ICMM, the Mining Association of Canada, or the Copper Mark and RJC have expectations of their members. But these are not multi-stakeholder or equitably governed independent standards. And so at times they can be used to help lift all members and say we have expectations of all, but they can also be used to set a lower common denominator, not have civil society involved in the audit process and the review. They don't have a lot of NGO credibility right now. And I think if we're going to move to that, we need to keep that credibility and the accountability and the service to NGOs and communities and labor unions as well. And so, I mean, if large companies want to have fewer standards, they can ask their industry trade associations to recognize their achievement in programs like IRMA or like IRMA that have that multi-stakeholder leadership. And last on that, on the carbon neutral one, I mean, I see, to pick up on what Jonathan said there too, I mean, carbon neutral, just like addressing child labor, so incredibly important, really important issues, but not the leading impacts of industrial scale mining. So if that's all we do, if the story becomes now carbon neutral, as the story before was about, we're going to address child labor, carbon neutrality at the industrial scale mine level is not our biggest impact. I mean, there in a climate stress world, we need to talk about water and waste and all of the social issues that flow out from water and waste. And then we're really diving into industrial scale mining in a climate stress world.
Thank you. As I'm listening to everyone, I'm thinking of this idea of radical transparency and how, we have so much to learn from it because we don't know what we don't know, right? We don't know what the needs are of communities or, environmental reclamation until we get there, until we experience it. And I am remembering the story of someone who was setting up on the ground, a story he told me about wanting to help a community and going in and building all of these things that the community actually couldn't use, right? And it actually, it wasn't until they actually engaged the community and said, oh, why aren't you using these facilities? Why aren't you using these products? And they're, oh, well, we need these things before we can use that, yeah. Right? And so if we engage in radical transparency, if we look at that as something that's a positive, I mean, how much waste we can cut down and how much time we can save if we can just get to that place. And so in thinking of that story, I actually connected to a question I wanted to ask Nick because of Newmont's work with Indigenous communities. And so, and because it kind of built off of this, it was a springboard for me. There was a mine in Australia where the Kurramat and Binigura people, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, and their mine was destroyed in 2020, even though it was considered a sacred space for those tribes. And it really was a wake-up call to I think a lot of communities and in people in the industry about cultural heritage and accountability. And so since Newmont does work with Indigenous communities, how are you ensuring that you're acknowledging their cultural heritage, their needs in an appropriate manner? So that incidents like this that have happened in the past, that you can learn. And another question, I guess, about lessons learned, but not necessarily the lessons that you incurred, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And I think the event you're referring to, Jennifer, is the Juukan Gorge destruction in Western Australia back in May of 2020. And I think, an understatement would be that was a wake-up call for the industry, for investors, for civil society, for Indigenous communities. It was a wake-up call, in flashing red lights to most out there. And I think, we certainly, as a company, would expect that, we have a cultural heritage standard that we've been using to guide the work we do with Indigenous communities around tangible and intangible heritage, protecting that. But we stepped back and said, let's use this as an opportunity to make sure that we think we're performing the way we hope we're performing. And did a really deep dive both on the standard that we have and how it's being implemented on the ground in real time. And through that process, we certainly identified many gaps, looking at Jukin Gorge, looking at what went wrong, what we could learn against our practices. And so we've been working on completing a gap, that filling those gaps, so to speak. We've updated our standard to reflect those learnings and changes. And we've implemented some different controls, if I could call them that, in terms of what we do now as a business around ensuring the cultural heritage, the knowledge, the information, and the management of that. One of the things I think that we took away from this, in addition to those, were a couple of things that we put into place immediately that said, there will be no disturbance anywhere of new ground at any mine, at any exploration project, at any project, until that proposed disturbance is verified against our cultural heritage maps, right? And so we stopped everything. We actually stopped 2 specific exploration projects and said, no, you don't have the information you need, stop. And until you get the information, you're not going to move forward. And so we took a very radical approach, but because we needed to. And we recognized that in certain places, we didn't have the level of information and detail that we needed to assure ourselves that we were managing and had the right to manage that information or those impacts. Another thing that we learned and that it really enabled us to do was to engage communities again in a different way. So let's assume that during the baseline studies of a new mine, we do our cultural heritage surveys, we develop all these maps of where significant sites and locations are, what the intangible cultural heritage is, and that information gets parked somewhere in the company's database. And it might be 15 years before you actually disturb a site that was approved, agreed with the community, and all those kinds of things, but that happened 15 years ago. So we took that opportunity to take all that information and maps to all of the communities around our active mines and said, we want to sit down and validate and verify your understanding of these culturally significant locations with ours, and to revalidate the fact that you recognize if we were going to disturb something, right, that you approve that you give us consent to do that you still give us consent to do that because this process happened 10 years ago. So that was a very positive change for us, again, was the opportunity to re-engage with the local communities around those things we've done in the past to make sure that consent exists today if any of those sites do need to be disturbed. And so those have been important things. The last one that I'll highlight is the engagement that it allowed us to have internal to the business. Clearly, from a governance perspective, the board of directors was incredibly interested in this. Senior management is incredibly interested in this because of all the harm and reputation that it caused to the company where this incident occurred. And so it created an opportunity for those of us in the sustainability side of the business to educate, to inform, to elevate the awareness of the importance of cultural heritage and really what it means and how we can truly impact that positively or negatively. And that's been an incredibly useful opportunity that we've taken advantage of and have an open door now with board, with our senior executive management to help them kind of understand how that overlays with our business and what our role is to respect the rights and the importance of that cultural heritage for Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. Cultural heritage is important to any community. And so we have to respect that. And the last thing I'll highlight quickly is that we've improved our ability from an institutional knowledge perspective. When we run studies 10, 15 years ago, baseline studies, that information is not easy to find. And those that need access to it, whether it's our mine planners or our project designers, may or may not be able to find that. So we have to have better ways of maintaining institutional knowledge and access to that knowledge for decades. because that's how long some of these larger scale mines are lasting, and we can't allow that information to get lost somewhere along the way. It's too critical and too important.
Thank you so much, Nick. Jonathan, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind if you could discuss the process and the importance of certifications, audits, and assurance, and linked to claims in the industry, particularly as they help the communities you work with.
Thank you. And I mean, I'm not saying we're like certifications or standards experts or anything, but so just going back to something was said before about the proliferation of a lot of certifications now and standards. We recently released a blog, and we were like reflecting on something that it happened, and it's actually an anecdote. Maybe we're all familiar with the story of Ralph the rabbit, and this is for the cosmetic industry, and to raise awareness about chemical testing in animals, right? And then I was particularly like, okay, run into my bottle of shampoo and say like, is there like a picture of a bunny or something, a certification that says that no animal was harmed into doing this? And then the question was like, okay, there's one. How can I know? And then I have to Google it, and then it will be easier if that brand in particular will just tell me what does that mean. And that for the jewelry industry, then it's sort of similar. So yes, there are a lot of standards and a lot of certifications that they hold, but what does that entail? So I am sustainable because, and then because I am using recycled gold, because I am using gold from ASM, because it's like, all right, but what is actually sustainability? And let's elaborate more on that, because we are now, there's the trend of responsible consumption. Now a lot of brands and the industry, they're just like joining the trend, which is great. Now they're getting certifications. Now the next step is just like to go deeper and the transparency about it. So I will say third-party audits or certifications that are very transparent in terms of how things are getting audited. That's a good start, because that provides assurance in that way. And yeah, and I wish that there was like something deeper than that, but as of right now, that's what that we can count on: the certifications and the audits that substantiate whatever claim comes after that certification.
Thank you so much. We're going to be running out of time soon, so I'm going to ask a couple of other specific questions, and then I have a question that I wanted to end on that I wanted to ask everyone. But Feriel, De Beers recently launched GemFair, an initiative that looks at supporting the formalization of the ASM sector. Can you talk a little bit about that and introduce the idea for the people watching?
Absolutely, Jennifer. Before I start on GemFair, there's been so much that's been said here today, and I just want to highlight some things so that they're not, that I need them to be heard. Jonathan and Nick both spoke about artisanal mining in such a strong way, and talked about it being a livelihood issue. And I completely agree with that. And Cristina, you mentioned that we can make artisanal mining more beautiful. And I completely agree with that. I think it's currently beautiful, and I think it's completely misunderstood. And let me just say one thing before I start on GemFair. De Beers is a mining company, yes, but we do have a footprint across the entire supply chain. We have retail also, De Beers Jewelers, that you would see in most high-end, roads in most capitals. And predominantly, though, we are a mining company. Supply chain issues are extremely important for us, because we're the only mining company that has a consumer-facing name. Let's be honest. Okay. Brand equity is a major issue for everyone. Brands are terrified of handling difficult issues. Large brands, small designers, They're scared. They see a challenge or something that's not perfect, and they're scared of it. And that's because of, what's happened over the last 3 decades, if we're honest. People pointing fingers, even when people try to do good. So when I'm saying, when I heard people saying, we're not perfect, Cristina, you said it, we're not perfect. NGOs are not perfect. Companies are not perfect. We're made of human beings, and we're trying to do our best, right? But the thing is, we can't give up. It doesn't matter if it's difficult. We just cannot give up. Now, one thing that we always do at De Beers is look at the future and look at the future of the industry. And one very strong trend that we see is the digitization of the market. I'm not an NGO, and we're not really into philanthropic initiatives. And so it's really critical for us to look at how do we make sure that we leave no one behind in this commercial future? How do we create that level playing field where artisanal miners, and not just artisanal miners, but the informal cutters and polishers, in the industry in India and other countries, and the mom and pops in the US also can engage, right? And so that's how the idea of GemFair started. And I think GemFair is the start of a big movement. It is challenging. And given our brand name, it was very, very difficult to start, because usually a large corporate organization like De Beers would develop the entire thing and then announce it. Here's what we're doing. For the first time, we announced the idea of what we wanted to do and recognized the challenges. And I can say that we would never have been able to do it if it wasn't for ARM or ARM, Jonathan, with the craft code, OECD, PACT, and Cristina, Moyo Gems. We would not have been able to do it without all of your great work, your publications, your learnings, your transparency around the challenges, so that we can understand what we were stepping into. And you know what? You can never be prepared to understand what you're stepping into. There's much that has happened in the ESM sector. And Nick, I loved what you said and also Cristina. It's about trying to commercialize it. That's really sustainability. You can't just throw money at it and try to resolve the issue. You need to find and develop a model where commercial sustainability is there as an incentive to drive real sustainability on the ground. And that's what we've been trying to do. So we announced it back in 2018, saying this is our intention at the OECD. And then we started, and we faced so many challenges, major challenges just setting up the business. The first thing you need to do when you set up a business is open a bank account. Okay. It's great to want to engage with the artisanal mining sector, but you need to do it legally, and you can't do it without a bank account. Let me tell you that, legally. No one will open a bank account for you, because you're saying diamonds, A, high risk, B, artisanal, higher risk. Then you're saying Sierra Leone, and it's, all the red flags. So you really need to be able to use the resources that you have, your knowledge, and that's what we did. We didn't pretend to know it all. We just knew what good looked like, and we knew what we knew. We developed due diligence mechanisms that would make the banking industry comfortable. And don't forget, we weren't looking for loans. We had money. We just needed to put it in a bank account to run the business, to access licensing, to pay for the infrastructure in the country, and to pay salaries.
And let me just say, sorry, Feriel, but let me just say, if De Beers cannot open a bank account, how on earth are artisanal miners able, possibly expected to formalize?
This is it.
I mean, can you imagine?
This is the crux of it. You know what, Cristina? This is it. I think people really don't understand. The narrative has been set, and it's very difficult to change that narrative. And the truth, and honesty around the challenges, on how difficult it is to engage with the sector in a manner that meets business integrity requirements, right? The barriers that we face. And when we overcome those barriers, then we start looking at the real challenges on the ground, co-creating, trying to find solutions, but we're competing with the informal world who aren't following the same rules. And you will never win. Let's be honest. You're never going to win. So we can't pretend that, you know, just by doing good or whatever, you're going to win. It's not going to happen. We need to find a commercially sustainable solution for the artisanal miners to be incentivized so we can scale it up in order to win. Now, once we resolved all those issues, and trust me, you know me, Cristina, I'm not the easiest person in the world. I'm quite, you know, strong when it comes to my beliefs, and I try my hardest to convince. You know, I definitely, it takes a lot for me to give up. We managed to set it all up to get that bank account with another bank and set up the business. And we started engaging with the artisanal miners. And, you know, we did all this research and we said, we're going to give them fair price. We're going to give them access to, you know, digital equipment. We're going to train them to understand the value of their production. We're going to this, we're going to that. We walked in and we did all of that. And, you know, we were met with not much interest. We got it wrong at the beginning because ultimately it all goes back to, you know, I say this to my husband all the time, the Maslow hierarchy of needs that we all studied back in school. I don't care about your fair value. The first thing that I need is security for me and my family, right? My needs, my psychological, I need food, I need water. And so that that dependency means that there's people surrounding them that are able to provide them with that informal financial support that businesses with integrity and legal compliance requirements will not be able to do. So how do you compete?
So
Fair
Feriel,
value.
so I think one of the reasons that we were able to be successful in Moyo was because there was no pre-financing happening. I know. Like I asked that question like 20 different ways because I couldn't believe that was, you know, I said, okay, what happens when you run out of money? What happens? They're like, we don't mind. I said, okay, why do you sell to that person? Oh, because I walked this other person and he didn't want to buy for me. So I asked 20 different ways. And when I realized that pre-financing was not happening when we were working, I was like, I think we have an opportunity here. Because we don't have what you're competing against. We have it in different ways, but not necessarily, you know, it's a different, like Nick said, every situation is different. And you know, in our case, we went there and we did co-create and we said, what are your challenges? And they told us, and then we solved for that. So I think in a way it was slightly easier because we didn't have that as complicated an environment as you did. But at the same time, people were like, well, why would we formalize without an incentive? You know, why on earth would I get my license? And I was like, well, it's required. And they're like, okay, then if it's required, then I'll do it. Once they realize they can make more money selling into a system. So it's about incentives. Why on earth would they stick their little head up? I shouldn't say little head. Why on earth would they stick their head up, you know, to be targeted for bribes, to have to report their income, to have to pay taxes? Unless it's a business case for that. And luckily there is that environment where they're mixing livelihoods. We don't have the same kind of debt relationship that you're facing in Sierra Leone, but you still have to have the business incentive to do so. And
well,
so
this is it.
What we're finding all over the world for PACT is formalization programs will not hold unless you have a business case.
Exactly.
Why on earth would people formalize otherwise? So that's why every single one of our projects, we have to talk to who's buying the stuff and then their customers and figure out how to make this business case, or else what we're trying to do is going to fail.
I couldn't agree with you more, Cristina. I think we probably definitely face different challenges in different contexts, but the access to financing is the main root of the issue because the artisanal miners and the mining communities, when you visit them, it's beautiful. It's happy. They're probably happier than most of us, let's be honest. But the perception externally is extremely different to the reality on the ground. Artisanal mining is often synonymous with conflict, and that's just not true. Maybe in some isolated cases, but it's just not true.
I usually
They
say
are
that,
human beings.
yeah, that miners
Like
just are like, the rural villagers try to make a living.
Exactly.
And I
So
think there's
for-
like, yeah, this kind of association with, young criminals, and when actually, yes, those folks do exist in some places, let's be honest, but in most cases, it's just everyday people, in a far off place trying to make a living where there's very few options.
I agree. And I think, the criminal world exists in every single industry, in the informal and the very formal sector.
Exactly.
So it's not, it's not synonymous with artisanal mine diamonds. And I know, Lisa, I know that we're close to the end, but I just want to make two more points here. The imagery of artisanal mining. I want to make it very clear. Yes, you are in mud. Yes, you're digging. Let me just explain. If you were at home needing to paint your child's room, would you wear your best clothes? No, you wouldn't.
Right.
I watch artisanal miners walk into the mine and get changed to their mining clothes. The reality is your t-shirts, your trousers, your shorts that you wear with mud and sun break because you leave them there. They're your work clothes. Then you wash yourself after work, you wear your nice clothes and you walk off. But those pictures are the pictures that seem to create a negative impression of the ASM. And people just want to walk away from it. But it's not negative. It's frankly just the same thing that we would do. We wouldn't wear our best clothes for a role or a job in the house, or that would get our best clothes destroyed. And I encourage people to learn more about the sector and stop criminalizing it, because it is just an easy way to walk away from what may seem quite challenging, but is actually quite an empowering and endearing community to engage with. Thanks, Lisa. And thank you, Cristina.
Thank you.
Okay, I have to jump in. Sorry, this is my unhappy task. I would love to see you all back at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning to continue this conversation. It has been spectacular. But, or not but, there is no but. And at the same time, we have not requirements for license in this particular context, but requirement for cessation and beginning of speech. And I have to bring this chapter, I'm going to use these words very carefully. I'm going to emulate Feriel, and I'm going to be very precise and say that what I'm doing is closing this chapter of this discussion, to which I invite you all back. I want to leave you with 3 points that were raised as questions so that we know some of the things that we're coming back to discuss. Examples of achievable goals in the for-profit sector, as opposed to referencing SDGs, OECD, etc. Specifics to anchor the conversation. Now, I realize some of these things have been done, but please, what I want to do is give you, because this time is so precious, to just make sure that there is this response heard, a discussion between the balance of enforcement of international laws and regulation and the encouragement of communities to transition to responsible practices. And What are the next steps beyond reforestation and corporate philanthropy in changing the landscape of mining? We are committed to this conversation. We thank each one of you for your incredibly passionate delivery of your concerns and perspectives. And seriously, if you'd like to resume the conversation at 10 a.m. tomorrow, we are game. But in the meanwhile, I don't come a knocking, as you know. It comes via email and telephone call and frantic communication, like, we've got this great thing, we want you to join, we are working for change, join us, and we want to create this platform. So I promise, if you can't come to breakfast tomorrow, you'll be at lunch the day after. Thank you all, and please forgive me for having to do this. And thank you especially to the journalistic community for having stepped in, because that is an invaluable perspective and one that contributes to engendering change in ways that are not recognized enough. So Jennifer, thank you so much. And we're so thrilled that you are at Aimee.